So as I do each week, we have a non-biblical reading because God didn't stop talking with the Bible, and God speaks through many people in many ways. And this is a wonderful book by Joan Chittister called In the Heart of the Temple, and I've been enjoying her little chapters on different themes and topics, and so you'll probably hear more from her during this Lenten season. So we're talking about Sabbath today, and she says this: Sabbath is meant to enrich life, to measure life, to bring reflection to life, to engender life with soul. Sabbath is for resting in the God of life and bringing more to life ourselves as a result. Sabbath is designed to be used to determine the meaning and substance, the purpose and direction of our lives. Sabbaths should be those time-out days when we allow ourselves to look at life in fresh and penetrating ways. Thinking has become the last thing in the world we want to do on the Sabbath. We have turned thought into human vegetation and called it rest. We have made a desert of the soul and called it recreation. We have substituted play and leisure for soul-searching and beauty, for intimacy and awareness of the larger things in life. We have created a culture that turns the Sabbath into a race for escape, a passion for things, a collection of distractions, a paean to emptiness.
The scripture reading this morning is from the book of Mark, chapter 2, verses 23 through 27. One Sabbath day, Jesus took a walk through the grain fields, and the disciples began to pick ears of grain as they went along. The Pharisees said to Jesus, "Look, why are they doing something on the Sabbath day that is forbidden?" And Jesus replied, "Did you never read what David did in his home at his time of need when he and his followers were hungry? How David went into the house of God, where Abiathar was high priest, and ate the loaves of offering, which only the priests are allowed to eat, and how he also gave some to those with him." Then Jesus said to them, "The Sabbath was made for people, not people for the Sabbath. That is why the chosen one is ruler, even of the Sabbath." So ends the reading.
Would you pray with me? Ancient One, let us bring our attention and our focus to your Spirit, to the ways that this morning touches our souls, to the questions that form in our hearts and our minds, to the insights and the wisdom that appear when we sink ourselves into you. And may the words of my mouth, the meditations of each of our hearts, be full of compassion and love and grace. Amen. So the season of Lent, as I've said before, is all about introspection. It's about reflecting on oneself. It's about doing some of the tough inner work that helps us to make a connection with the divine and with others. And so as part of this introspection, it makes sense to talk about Sabbath, especially because it feels like we're losing, or maybe we've lost, the concept of Sabbath in our society. You know, there are some things that I'd be okay if our society lost. We could lose World Wrestling and I'd be okay. We could lose reality TV and I'd be fine. Those all-you-can-eat contests, I'd be good if we lost some of these society things. But I think losing Sabbath time is actually detrimental. Not only to our spiritual lives, but to our very selves, to our lives in general. There's not much historical basis for Sabbath earlier than the ancient Hebrews. as I was saying to the kids, the standard practice back then was you just worked all the time. There was no break for the animals, for the slaves, for the women, for the men. There was no break. The biblical basis for Sabbath time comes from Genesis 2, where we get the whole creation story. God creates everything in 6 days, right? And then on the seventh day, God rests. But that model of rest isn't just to sleep. That model of rest was for renewal. It was a time to revel in all that was made that was good. To have a day to live life with an abundance and joy. Sabbath was the cornerstone of the Hebrew faith, and probably still is the cornerstone of the Hebrew faith. If you look at the first 5 books of our Old Testament, which are also the first 5 books of the Hebrew Scriptures, Sabbath is mentioned over and over and over again. So as we talk about it, it's interesting and important to remember that we have a deep historical basis for all of this. Now, I entitled my sermon name is Sabbath, Rest, or Vegetation, because I think that many people believe that, well, if you hang out Sunday afternoon and you sit and watch TV all day, that's Sabbath time. And it's really not. It's not to say that there isn't a time and a place for, complete downtime and just shutting your brain off. But that's not what Sabbath time is about. In our little story that Robin read for us today, Sabbath time was created for people. It was created for a purpose, Jesus is trying to point out. Everybody's all hung up on the fact that he wants to do quote-unquote work on the Sabbath time. He says, it's not about the rules that surround Sabbath. It's about the intent and the purpose of Sabbath to be a time of renewal and a meaningful time. So if we look at the original time of Sabbath, as I said to the kids, it starts on sundown on Friday, ends on sundown on Saturday for Jews, and it always begins and ends with ritual. Begins and ends with candles, either being lit or being extinguished, with scripture reading, with prayers, with sharing food, whether it's breaking bread or sharing a glass of wine. There's time for worship on Saturday morning as they gather at synagogue together. There's time for being with family. And there is a limit of work that can be done. So it's an off-the-grid time. There is no talking on the phone. There's no watching TV. There's no playing on the internet. There's no sending an email. It's all downtime in that sense. But it's meant for study and reflection and building the relationships, for socializing with friends and with one another. It's even a time for making love with the one that you're married to. Because that was the most sacred time that you could do that. To create a child on the Sabbath was one of the most sacred things you could do. In the little part of Joan Chittister's book that I read, she says that Sabbath time is meant to enrich life. It's meant to give us purpose and direction and be meaningful. It's time to reconnect with the people around you while at the same time you're sort of disconnecting electronically. So Sabbath time. I'm afraid that in our society, perhaps we've lost it. Maybe when some of us were growing up, we had a better idea of Christianized, Americanized Sabbath time. I mean, how many of you grew up in a time where on Sunday mornings you went to church and then you either went home for a big family meal or you traveled to grandparents' houses and you had that big family meal? I see a number of people nodding. And so you spent time with family. That was your Sabbath time. You played games, you ran around outside with the kids. and it was a time of renewal. And now society has changed so that we have 7-day work weeks. We have stores that are open 7 days a week. We have sports programs on Sunday mornings. And we don't have that concentrated day where society sort of shuts down and allows us an easy out in having that Sabbath time. Now Sundays have become, I need to catch up on my errands and get a few things done and do the housework before I go back to work on Monday. And it's sort of a shame that all of that's happened, because I think we've lost something that gave us meaning and direction. A friend tipped me off to this wonderful book called Deep Work by Cal Newport. Rules for Focused Success in a Distracted World. Now, I will grant you that this is almost through and through a business book. Julie thought I was nuts for reading it. But you can look at, see, I didn't even get all the way through and I got all my little marks in here. Because the more I read it, the more I thought, this really applies to the concept of Sabbath. So Cal Newport talks about the difference between shallow work and deep work, which you can probably get just from the title, but let's flesh it out just a little bit. So shallow work is something that doesn't take a lot of concentration. It's the stuff you have to get done that clogs up your to-do lists, or it's the shallow activities that suck you into them and you lose time. All of a sudden you realize an hour is gone and you don't know where it went. So what qualifies then as shallow work or a shallow activity?
Dishes.
Dishes, Facebook, absolutely. Get sucked into that, do you, Bob? Yeah. Don't we all? What else? Laundry. Email. Just about anything internet qualifies as shallow work. What else? Clean the litter box. Aimless TV. We can add paying bills and filing and meetings, and appointments, and telephone calls that we have to return, and computer games that we play, futzing around on our phone, texting people. All of those things are shallow work. And some of it's necessary in our work and in our daily lives, but that's the shallow stuff. So deep work is the stuff that requires focus and concentration. And he even goes so far, even as a business person, to say that deep work can be very sacred work. And he uses the example of a woodworker. Someone who's creating maybe a bowl out of a piece of wood, and the focus and the concentration that it takes to create that, and how a woodworker will say they've become one with that wood, and it becomes an experience of sacredness to do that. So deep work has a broad range of applications as we talk about it. But what would qualify as deep work, do you think? Meditation could be deep spiritual work.
Milk cows.
To milk cows? I'm finding it, yeah, okay. If I concentrate really hard on that, huh? Okay.
I'd have to say paying bills. That's not shallow work. I mean, I have to focus.
You have to focus, but do you derive purpose and meaning out of that? That becomes the
We
next
have to know what
piece.
comes after me.
Jolene?
Music preparation for performance.
Yes. Absolutely. So to prepare music, to practice an instrument. He talks about, a symphony violinist who has to have a concentrated amount of hours of practice time every day without distraction. What else? Walking?
It lowers your cholesterol.
It lowers your cholesterol. And then you will get a good series back.
Sermon writing.
Writing, any kind of writing. Whether you're writing poetry or you're writing a book or you have, a report to write, something for work that's deep work. Cooking could sometimes, if you're really focusing on it and enmeshing yourself. Lots of hobbies. You're quilting, Sue. could be considered deep work.
Baking bread.
Baking bread, the kneading bread, you can lose yourself in that in a healthy sort of spiritual way. So there are lots of applications. Just problem solving can sometimes be deep work. If you need to spend a concentrated amount of time thinking through things. You know, we have a creative worship group, so I have a group that I meet with about once a month, and we spend 3 hours working through the scripture readings for the next month and doing the deep work of brainstorming and throwing ideas and questions out there. Prayer could be deep work, deep spiritual work. So, all of these things, in my opinion, qualify as Sabbath time in that, as John Chittister said, they give us purpose and meaning and substance and direction. And they're not always solitary things, and so they can build relationship. They're growth inspiring. They're renewing activities. There's a woman named Winifred Gallagher who's a science writer. And she discovered, quite by accident, the connection between attention and happiness when she was diagnosed with cancer. And it wasn't just any old cancer. She said it was a nasty, fairly advanced cancer. And she found that it wanted to suck up every ounce of her time and attention and energy. And yet, with her training as a science writer, she was able to focus on some of the things in her life that brought her happiness. And she quoted 3 specifically: movies and walks and 6:30 martinis. So she said, with that focus, she deliberately chose to try and focus on some of the positive things in her life, so that when she came to the end of the cancer treatment, she could look back and say, you know, that wasn't all that unpleasurable, oddly enough. It wasn't like the worst, most awful time in my life. And so she started to do research on the role that attention plays in our lives. And she discovered that there's quite a plethora of substantiating research that says that what you put your focus and attention on matters much more than the circumstance that you're in. So if she had chosen to allow cancer to monopolize her time and her energy and all of her thought, she could have gone down a path that was depressing and fearful and anxiety-ridden. And instead, she allowed herself to focus on just some of the simple pleasures in life. Walks and movies and 6:30 martinis. And so she found that her time and her life was more pleasurable. At the end of the day, she said that what the research showed is that who you are, what you do, how you feel, love what you love, is a product, the sum total of what you put your attention on. So if we translate this to shallow work and deep work, if we spend 95% of our time doing shallow work, we are the sum total of what we are focusing on. And our lives will have less meaning and feel more shallow. But if we spend some intentional time having those blocks of deep work that's full of importance and impact for our lives, then who we are will be to ourselves something that's more meaningful, that's more fulfilled, that's more life-giving. Does that make sense? So here's the problem. There are a lot of squirrels in the world. You've often heard me do this, and you go, squirrel! Yeah, okay. Newport quotes a 2012 study where researchers gave out beepers to 205 people. And these beepers went off at randomly selected times. And when they went off, the participants had to make note of the desires that they were feeling at the moment and in the previous 30 minutes. So the beeper would go off and they'd have to answer a set of questions about all of these desires. After about a week, he had a sample of about 7,500 instances. And what he discovered was that we are ruled by our desires. That is the norm, not the exception. He said, top of the list. If you had to guess your top three, what would be the top three?
Food.
Sex, food, and 6:30 martinis. No, sleeping. After that, interestingly enough, the next most prevalent desire was to get out of doing the deep work. Was to find a way to take a break from the hard work. See, because deep work is hard work, shallow work is easy work, according to Newport. So people wanted to, they had a desire to stop doing that. I really want to go play on the internet. I want to watch TV for a while. I want to listen to music for a while. I want to check my phone for a while. And he found that people were only successful about 50% of the time in not being distracted. So sadly, when it comes to having this Sabbath time, this deep work time for ourselves, we have a huge issue in our ability to be distracted. So I did an experiment as I'm writing this sermon. I'm like, okay, I'm going to shut off my phone, I'm going to shut off my email, I'm not going to do anything but have 2 hours of focused time on this sermon. And I found myself getting agitated. Like, I really should check my phone and see if anybody called. Like, I really should check my email. What if there's something important on my email that I need to do? And it was really sort of disconcerting that I couldn't do 2 hours completely off the grid just to focus because I wanted a break from that hard work. Apparently, we also have a finite amount of willpower, Newport also says, sadly. So this is also a detriment to all of this. So what's the answer? He suggests that the answer is routine and ritual. That to most effectively use your limited amount of willpower and monitor your distractions, that you set a routine in your life and a practice of those times where you have Sabbath time or deep work time. And that sounded to me completely like what a Sabbath day was supposed to be. A routine time, a ritual time to engross people in something more than themselves, to do the deep spiritual work of life, to get out of, to have time where you had to put down distractions. So they made rules. They said you can't do all that work. You absolutely cannot do all that work. And now it's in the Bible. It's you can't do that work. Because this other stuff is important. It's important for your soul. It's important to live a fulfilled life. Now Jesus came and went, all right, y'all are getting hung up on this. Don't do any work. Because the real intent was just for you to live a fulfilled, meaningful life. So he says there are lots of ways that you can schedule that time. Some people take, months and hide away in a cabin so they can write. Or they take a week of being off the grid and shutting everything down. Those sorts of things don't seem practical for us in this day and age. Maybe if you could do that, God bless you, go take a week away and shut everything off and have some deep time. But even scheduling an hour or two here and there to go off the grid, to do something that absorbs your soul in a positive, fulfilling way, in a sacred way, fills you. And I'm sorry, Beth, it ain't bills. There are things that we do together. And this is the other piece. It's not always about having time alone, especially if you're problem solving. You need people to bounce things off of, like our Theology and Tap group, where we get together and we just talk about spiritual questions, and we learn from one another and our answers and our questions. We have this time on Sunday morning. We have, the women's retreat, which is a focused, day away. We're going to have a fall retreat if anybody's interested in, 6 or 7 hours to just get away and have some deep work time. But by and large, it's up to you, to disconnect from everything we're connected to schedule some time, to have it sometimes be time with other people. And to remember that what we focus on is who we are. And so who do we want to be? What kind of life do we want to live? I think that's about it. Amen.